Here we go. I'm Scott.
I'm Ben.
And this is a review. On today's episode, which is episode 11, you will notice that there are some key differences. One, you don't notice anything because it's all audio now. We're switching over due to some things that I'm not going to go into. We're just going to be sticking with audio for the time being, which it almost already is. So that's that. Deal with it. Moving on. Today's episode, we will be reviewing Pacific Rim Uprising. Pacific Rim Uprising tells the story of Pacific Rim, an old movie from the year 2013. Watch as John Boyega forgets about training his team of teeny bopper monster fighters to eat ice cream and talk shit to his boss's teeth, played by Scott Eastwood. But after a major twist that isn't telegraphed in the first 10 minutes, they must put aside their forced differences to fight back against the kaiju threat, which doesn't actually present itself until the final 30 minutes. So Ben, what did you think about Pacific Rim Uprising?
Pacific Rim Uprising is like the dumber, more glossy, like fully committing to aping a Transformers movie, like really leading into...
I don't want to say that it's aping Transformers, but this is definitely the Michael Bay take on Pacific Rim.
Yeah, 100%.
At least with this, the robots have a full form, and you can tell where one begins and the other ends.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they're not just a big junkyard pile of crap.
Yeah, like this still does have like a pretty good amount for the action scenes. There's a really cool geography to them, and they still play out. Like, that's the one thing that I'm really happy about that translated over from the loss of Guillermo del Toro directing it, was they fully were aware of like the sense of the scope and scale and like the size of these things and really playing it up, and that was really cool. Then they injected that in the action scenes like really well.
Unfortunately, this movie is almost entirely devoid of any action scenes until the end.
Yeah, it's basically just a series of like disasters.
I don't know, like I was trying to think back.
Because things do blow up and things do appear, but not the stuff that you really want to appear.
We were talking about this before we started, and I was literally trying to recall the events of the movie, and we just watched this, and I could not remember, like, what were they doing during this entire... Like, okay, the beginning of the movie has a decent setup. They kind of recap the first Pacific Rim. They kind of mention that the world's rebuilt itself in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. Everything's hunky-dory again. And then they introduce us to this little girl. John Boyega meets her, and she's got a great intro scene where we kind of first see a real Jaeger versus the little home-brewed Jaeger robot that she built.
Yeah.
Very interesting stuff. And then it just hits the brakes hard.
All of it collapses.
Yeah.
Because then they're like, oh no, we just gotta get to like Pacific Rim again.
Yeah. But for the next hour or so, the plot is basically the pilots are going to be replaced with drone pilots. Yeah. And that's an issue because why? There's no kaiju. There's no monsters. There's no reason to have giant mech pilots other than to avoid them in the future. But, like, I don't know. The conflict in this movie seems to be a non-issue to me.
I mean, you could argue the bulk of the movie is just about the perks of having those $160 billion defense budgets. You know?
Basically, yeah.
That's this exorbitant military spending at work here.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because the first movie, it was like the end of a trilogy that didn't exist. That's what a lot of people described it as, Pacific Rim, because it's like they were fighting these monsters for years. They were at the end of the war.
Yeah, there's a whole history that we really only see in flashback in Pacific Rim. That there's a whole mine of material here.
And the Jaegers, the giant robots, are expensive, and they make a point of showing that they're really expensive and hard to build, and it takes a long time. And they're fragile, like they fall apart as soon as they get into combat. So it's like, it's not even the most elegant solution. Pacific Rim Uprising, they have Jaegers flying out of their ass, literally.
Oh, yeah. They're just churning them out.
And they're invincible. Like, they can take... They get knocked down all the time. They're getting thrown around like toys, and nothing. They don't really break apart like they... Like, I don't know. There's no threat like there was in the first movie.
Yeah.
With, like, when they got into an engagement with these kaiju, it was like they were going down with them.
So I began the review with a thing that I was really happy translated over from the loss of Guillermo del Toro as director, was the size and scope and scale. The one thing that does not transfer over is the craft and tangibility and like full immersion into the world that you get with Guillermo del Toro. There's definitely a lot less commitment to practical effects. This is a very much a full bore, high gloss, green screen supreme
blockbuster
ice cream machine. Yeah. So you definitely lose the real like character.
Yeah, and
that makes Pacific Rim still so charming because because Pacific Rim. You said this when we were talking on the way back, how this felt like mediocre Pacific Rim fanfic.
Yes.
This is very much the generic, okay, let's get the think tank together to shit out a Pacific Rim sequel if there's audience demand for it.
Yeah. But that's also because of a large majority of the movie is the little girl character who you'll see on the trailers. I don't know her name. She is constantly like naming the Jaegers by name. Oh, there's Geronimo Volcano or whatever. Like, they have these ridiculous names. And then, like, she knows the names of the kaiju. And I know Charlie...
And, like, the pilots.
Yeah,
like,
she knows...
Because they established...
She's a fangirl of Pacific Rim.
Yeah.
Like, that's what it doesn't feel like...
She's a like IMDb message board come to life.
Yeah, like in the first one, Charlie Day, who returns in this one... Yeah. He was that character in a lot of ways. He was the kaiju
anime fan.
Yeah. But it was, once again, with Guillermo del Toro, he was kind of playing up all these characters as like caricatures, whereas this movie doesn't have that self-awareness. It's like they are caricatures, but to the nth degree, and it's like they are just completely
stockly
flat.
Written, flat, bland.
Yeah,
like,
there's no personality.
Yeah, the only real quality hamming it up, that we get here is from, I think, Pacific Rim 1 and low-key MVP, definitely 6-man award winner, Berg Orman, who plays one of the neurotic Kane enabled
he was
scientist. He's one of the wacky...
The logical scientist in the first one that went against Charlie Day's more illogical, crazy ideas.
Yeah.
And what's funny, and obviously they've done the classic role reversal here, Charlie... Because his plan in the first movie saved the day, he became kind of famous and up his own ass. Whereas Mr. Cane Man, I'm not trying to be an ableist, but Mr. Cane Man, I don't know his name, he is kind of the nut job now. And like, he's got the crazy crackpot ideas that save the day. And it's like, okay.
Yeah. He's their Jordan Peterson.
So a lot of this movie focuses on John Boyega training this new group of pilots.
Yeah.
And there are these kids, and it's just, it feels so unnecessary.
A great encapsulation of the disappointing generic quality and like dumbing down is the Supremo MVP Independence Day speech giving Stacker Pentecost's son.
Yeah.
His name is Jake.
Jake the Snake. Pentecost.
Jake?
I know, it's so lame.
Like, what? Loader.
Stacker Pentecost is hands down it's like a wrestling name. That's so badass.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
You can't, he wouldn't name his son Loader or Jaeger.
Something. Or Titanium. I don't know.
Yeah. Hunter. Gunner.
So like, you have this team.
At least give a fucking white trash name, not just like fucking like...
Jake.
Yeah, like
that's
the
lame.
dude in the polo, like...
It's Ryan Pentecost. Like, Bill. Like, really? All right.
Steve Pentecost.
So he's training this team, but once again, to what end? Like, they're training this new end of pilots in case they come back, but it's like...
It's like very...
I don't know.
They like... say it's the contingency plan, like by like a like there's a little sequence there where Scott Eastwood has no function as a character. He's just vomiting exposition.
That's all he does in the movie. He's just angry military guy.
Yeah, he at least feels more like a person.
No, he doesn't. He's a robot.
What, you weren't wooed by those Eastwoodian charms?
No, him just talking through his teeth the whole movie. We're gonna save the day.
He definitely went to the daddy school of acting.
Oh, excuse me. So finally, towards the end of the movie, you get this obvious twist. I mean, there's a character that's been promoting using drones. That's kind of a red herring. We're gonna spoil this. I don't care. It's an interesting twist. The only interesting part of this movie is that Charlie Day's character has been communicating through the brain of a dead kaiju and has basically been infected by the creature in the other dimension that creates the kaiju.
Yeah.
And so he's the villain of the movie, and he's the one bringing in kaiju to take over. But this doesn't happen until the last 30 minutes, and it's so frustrating because they keep arguing the whole movie about who's right and who's wrong, and then finally they get to this conflict, and it's like, none of that mattered. This is what we've been waiting for.
Yeah.
And it's just so frustrating to sit through.
The first actual, because you and I both like leaned forward and were like, okay, there is a very real pivot where the movie actually begins.
Yes.
Like, start this movie, the sequel,
like an hour
like
in.
where they took all of like the actual cool franchise DNA from Pacific Rim is the last 30 minutes. So it's like, no, when you make this sequel, you start that movie where this one
like ends. But the problem is that they, we keep talking about the kids. The kids' story, it's not terrible in and of itself. It's basically like your standard X-Men First Class. You get a bunch of people together, or Kingsman. You have a bunch of like outsiders together.
An internationally diverse cast of kids, and they're just cracking wise.
They cut to them so sparsely, so randomly throughout the movie. They'll be training, and then like we don't get to know them, and it's like it's too much. With the other story with Charlie being possessed by a kaiju brain and bringing in creatures, that's interesting.
Yeah,
there's a movie there.
Oh yeah,
but it's like jammed up with this other movie that is like trying to exist through the cracks of this bigger movie, and it just doesn't ever work.
If I was gonna put my overall criticism of Pacific Rim Pacific Rim Uprising into like 2 words. Generic and unfocused. This is the dumbed down, high gloss, streamlined version, yes, but this is also where there's all these like little subplots, and we have to have all these fucking characters that we don't actually care about and give a shit about that ultimately go nowhere anyway. So why the fuck not? Like,
I would add to generic and what was the other word?
Unfocused.
I would add to generic and unfocused, overstuffed. It's got too many things to focus on and focuses on none of them, which is a common complaint we've had with movies this year. You've heard me say this literally before. I've said this exact same thing about other movies.
They just don't commit to a
one plot. Movies try to do too much, and it's like you only need to do one thing. A movie doesn't need to be so convoluted for no reason, and this movie is. Like we said, some of the action is fun. When you get to the final climax of the movie and you get your kaiju finally in the movie, you get your Jaegers fighting them.
The Jaeger kaiju wad blow is fantastic.
It is. And even then, I had to say, it's exhausting. Like, by the time it's over, it's kind of like, okay, if this was spread out a little bit more throughout the movie, I wouldn't. But it's like it all just gets handed to you in one sequence, in like one big chunk. And it's just like...
Exactly. And that's another thing that Pacific Rim was far superior. In Pacific Rim, you have interspersed really, between 4 to, they're not really sustained sequences.
Yeah.
And they're presented in a novel enough way, because already in here, like, the hardcore audience, which is really the only reason Pacific Rim it even got a sequel.
China.
Yeah, exactly. Between
Sorry, I'm sick. If you didn't notice. Sorry.
Yeah, he's been coughing all day. China.
So,
Sorry, nerds.
yeah. So, for final thoughts, Pacific Rim, Ben, what do you think about Pacific Rim Uprising?
It's really bland and like really dumb and forgettable until the last 30 minutes, but then like the last 30 minutes, like by virtue of it, all the kaiju stuff is jammed into this last chunk where it suffers from like the Man of Steel finale syndrome, where it's just like, okay, like it was cool 5 minutes ago, but like, so I'd still give it, I'll be damned if I wasn't a giddy little boy, like, stomping my feet in the seats during all the kaiju stuff still, so...
So, Ben, on a scale of 1 to 10 somethings, what would you give Pacific Rim Uprising?
I would give Pacific Rim Uprising 5 elbow rockets out of 10.
All right. I'm kind of right there with you. Pacific Rim Uprising starts kind of promising. It had kind of an interesting style to it in the beginning, and as soon as they got into the plot, that all just fell flat on its face. I don't know what happened. The movie will completely just go over your head for the next hour, and then, like Ben said, the last 30 minutes or so, you get the trailer. You get all the action scenes. You get big robots fighting big monsters. It's exciting until it isn't. It goes on too long at the end. The thing that you're waiting for the entire movie is then too much. So if they would have maybe spread it out a little bit, it could have been more interesting. But yeah, I don't know. Definitely nowhere close to the first one. I give Pacific Rim Uprising 4.5 vials of kaiju blood out of 10.
Nice. So they do tease that they're setting up threads for 3.
Yeah.
Whereby they will be
going to the home world and fighting back.
Yeah. So
if they do that and just be done with it, that's fine. So on that note, this has been a review. I'm Scott.
I'm Ben.
Thanks for listening and only listening. Yeah. Bye.